Welcome one and all to the FilmFile, episode 73. Not only going to be a great show, it was also a great year. Say again?
We're 77.
Are we 77? It's come up on all of the 73, all of the 7. All right, sorry, yeah, I was thinking 73. I'm sure we've done that. At 7:30 this morning, I was awoken by a phone call from the BBC asking me to comment on the passing of Richard Donner. It wasn't a great way of waking up. To be perfectly honest, an incredibly sad way to wake up because I've been a fan of Richard Donner through most of his through most of his filmmaking career. Of course, for me, it started with Superman. But what I didn't realize, I'd been enjoying the work of Richard Donner across his work on television. Richard Donner passed away at the age of 91 and leaves behind a huge legacy of work right through the 70s and the 80s and making a mark today in the way that we watch our movies. So instead of our usual deep dive into one film, we'll be deep diving into the career of the legendary director, a director behind an eclectic mix of some of the most remembered great time movies. The filmmaker is behind some of the most beloved blockbusters of my generation and hopefully some of your generation, hopping between genres to make major Hollywood entertainment that, while action-packed and spectacular, always had that one element. They were impeccably crafted and they had heart and soul. Andy, to talk about Richard Donner, we're going to talk about films that I know you and I both love. And we talked about Superman the movie on this very show in one of our deep dives only last year, I believe. So what are your memories of Richard Donner and what work for you just jumps out? And keeping in mind that for a lot of people outside of the film industry, and outside of film fandom, he wasn't a name that was a household name, but you could instantly recognize just some of his work. And I had that this morning. We're talking about it on the BBC. Was you were explaining to people not so much about the man, but about the legacy of work that he's left behind.
Yeah, I mean, you've said that Superman was basically your introduction, but you didn't realize that you'd seen his work on TV previously. And yeah, for myself, Superman in 1978 was my introduction to him as a filmmaker without acknowledging his name. I think I only started acknowledging his name during the 80s when his name popped up on Lethal Weapon in 1987. Because by that point, I'd already seen The Omen. As a young horror fan, I was introduced to The Omen at maybe too young an age. But wow, that film has stuck with me ever since. And it's within my Blu-ray collection. Most of Donner's films are in my Blu-ray collection for very good reason. Films such as The Goonies in 1985. Again, I didn't recognize his name within there, but that's a film that I latched onto and I loved and adored. And so, like I say, it was the late 80s when Lethal Weapon was sold with Richard Donner's Lethal Weapon. I was like, hang on, this guy's something. And then, because I was getting to that era where I was starting to read Empire magazine, etc., I started researching and went, that's who he is. Right. What else has he done? And then I found out that he'd done Scrooged as well. And he's done films such as The Toy, which is not a well-known film, but I have a fondness for The Toy. It's a Richard Pryor film from early 1980s, just when Richard Pryor was on that peak of his career. Not a great Richard Pryor film, but I was at the right age for that to give me some enjoyment. And it's like you say, he's been behind so many films that you might not know his name, but you'll have definitely experienced his films, be it the Lethal Weapon series, be it Maverick, the 1994 relaunch, which had Mel Gibson in it. Great film. Well worth checking out if you've not seen it. Or his work behind the scenes as producer.
Yeah, absolutely right.
His work behind the scenes as producer on things like the X-Men franchise or the Tales from the Crypt franchise. His name is over so much to do with cinema that you've definitely, in some way, shape or form, experienced his work somewhere along the lines.
That's interesting. That's the way that I described it today when I was talking to the interviewer, who clearly wasn't a film fan and had no reason to be. And then I actually mentioned Scrooge, and he went, "I didn't know he did that. That's one of my all-time go-to Christmas film." He was he was a strong filmmaker across a multitude of, as I said before, genres, um, different styles of movie making, and he always brought that one thing to it, and that's down to his career in television. Is he brought craft. He wasn't a flashy director. He didn't have a unique visual style. He was a workmanlike director, but it had craft and it had heart and soul, and you always thought he was doing the best possible work that he could do, even if the material wasn't the best material. Richard Donner was always at his A game and always provided an entertaining piece of work, and I think that was his craft, and that's why he was so beloved across the uh, across the industry. He was also apparently a really nice guy. Actors liked to work with him. He had strong political beliefs, and wasn't afraid to use his films as soapboxes to talk about those political beliefs. He made some interesting choices. He did the medieval fantasy Ladyhawke, starring Matthew Broderick and Rutger Hauer and Michelle Fisher and Michelle Pfeiffer. And even though it underwhelmed at the box office, it gave an opportunity to do the firm family favorite, The Goonies, and he worked with Spielberg on that. And again, he was just the actor that, again, he was just the director that you could go to, that 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 just had such a great sense of craft. I mean, as I said, when I discovered him on TV and not knowing it, he was a director of the Twilight Zone and
Mm.
TV westerns and uh, the Banana Splits adventures. He did the live action sequences on those. So he's a person who learnt his craft and then moved slickly into movies with a couple of with a couple of films that don't really sit that highly on his CV. But when it came to The Omen, that was the game changer. That gave him Superman 2, and that brought him a film that not only changed his career, but changed the movies that we watch today, because Kevin Feige and Jeff Johns all talk about Superman 2 because A, it's the classic that it is, which is because of Donner. But it was a game changer for comic book fans because it did have heart and soul, and it took it seriously enough to make us believe. And if you don't believe in fantasy films, if your heart doesn't reach out to fantasy films, then I don't think we'd have got the X-Men that we've got today, which, as you said, his production company was behind. And we wouldn't have got the MCU that we know today. And I think that's all down to Donna and Superman the movie. So a fine director who made some great movies.
It was an interesting career where you look at the range of films that he did. He's not someone that you could pigeonhole. He's not someone that you say, oh, he does this kind of, he does sci-fi, or he does horror, or he does action. He did everything. The Omen is still one of the best horror films ever made. In my opinion, it far outshines most modern day horrors, and I will happily go back to it. The visual effects, the practical effects that were used, are still shocking today to watch. From a head getting severed with glass to a lightning rod falling from a steeple and impaling, well, one of the doctors, as far as I was concerned at the time. Yeah,
Yes.
it's an absolutely powerful film, and yeah, it created a whole like a hyper consciousness about religious like doomsday predictions around the time that it got released. It was one of those films in the 70s that just created this hysteria of like horror. But then you get the Goonies, which is it's the most perfect coming of age kids film that isn't patronizing to the kids. It doesn't play it down to the children. It plays it quite seriously, but with a childish spirit to it. And then you get the utter action fest of the Lethal Weapon series, which we spoke about last year because I watched all four of them, and they do peter off on the third and fourth one, but those first two films still yet I can rewatch the Lethal Weapon 1 and 2 over and over again. And like you said, you've mentioned Scrooged on the radio today and got the response of, that's one of my favourite Christmas films. And it's beloved to so many people, but they don't know that Donner was a part of it because it's so different to everything that he did. That's what I loved about him, is that you can have a collection of all of his films on a shelf, and no matter what mood you're in for what kind of film you want to watch, there'll be something in Donner's history for you to go, I'm in a bit of superhero mood. Oh, I want just a brainless action film. I want a bit of horror. I want a bit of horror that's more in tone for like watching with the young uns. Tales from the Crypt. There you go. I want just a generic action film like from recent years. 16 blocks will do. There's something in there for everything. And he did a Western. And you know what I love about Westerns? I love Westerns. Maverick is one of my favourite Westerns. I will
It's a
never
great
get
film, and
tired.
often forgotten off the list, to be honest, of some of the films that he did.
Yeah, it just didn't get received very well at the time. I know it got critically well received, but it just didn't find an audience. And it's a shame because I would have loved to have seen that turn into a new franchise. But what, we will never get to find out what happened next. But I can't express my love for Richard Donner and his work enough. Lots of his films have had a huge influence on me in one way or the other at different stages of my life. And he's probably one of the most prominent directors throughout my life that has work that I consistently return to.
I think that knowingly or unknowingly, he spearheaded a lot of genre. What's the word? What's the term I'm looking for? We're going with this. He spearheaded a lot of genre game changers. You mentioned that with The Omen. We talked about it with Superman. He did the buddy film again with Lethal Weapon. He did the big budget family film, and he stepped into all these genres, and then launched on the back of that. There became other films that followed in his wake. There was suddenly more buddy movies after Lethal Weapon. There were the big budget kids adventures after Goonies, and he always had that. He left a mark on Hollywood and across so many different genres, and he made films that we just enjoyed because he brought craft and he brought love to it, and changed a lot of people's lives. Even if you weren't familiar with the name Richard Donner, then you'd be familiar with the body of work that he's left behind. So bless him. Godspeed, Richard Donner. You were a big part of our filmmaking growing up, and you'll be sadly missed. But we got chance to spend time in the entertainment that you created.
If you want to get in touch with us or know more about the show, you can do so by simply
popping over to Twitter and following us at FilmFile UK. You can head over to Instagram and see pictures of us, FilmFile UK. Or you can email us with anything, your love of films, your hatred of films, what films we should watch, why we're wrong about Kingpin from the Farrelly Brothers. Podcast at filmfile.uk.
We weren't, Andy. We weren't.
That's podcast at filmfile.uk. I thoroughly hope someone emails in to just say, you're wrong, you're wrong.
That one person. Yeah, you're all allowed an opinion. Just because we've got our own handy-dandy podcast doesn't mean that we're always right.
It'll be one of the Farrelly Brothers email us.
Yeah.
The other one will email to say we're right.
So, as you know, dear listeners, every week we are doing a deep dive into some classic films. This week we're picking for you, so put on your headphones, get out a beer can, and listen along to our deep dive into Dazed and Confused, a 1993 American coming-of-age comedy written and directed by Richard Linklater, and starring a cast of, well, just about anybody who was at that point up and coming in Hollywood. Before I talk about my great love of Dazed and Confused, which I'm not sure what Andy's take's going to be, just to point out again, going back to what Andy said at the beginning of the news, because this film was a commercial disappointment at the box office. It grossed less than 8 million in the US. Didn't really find much of an audience outside of the US because, well, it's a very American-centric movie. But despite all that, this film has enjoyed a critical and commercial success over the years. It's one of those films because of word of mouth that's become that because of word of mouth that has led this film to become a cult film. In fact, it ranked third on Entertainment Weekly's magazine list of the 50 best high school movies of all time, and 10th of the funniest films of the past 25 years. So, some films just have to find an audience. Anyway, if you don't know much about Dazed and Confused, don't be surprised because, as we said, it's not a, because, as I said, it wasn't a big box office take and it certainly didn't find much of a crowd in this country. But the plot, such as it is, follows different groups of Texas teenagers during their last day of school in 1976. 1976, when all the teenagers, according to this movie, wanted to either grab a beer, get stoned, and listen to some very loud rock and roll. This film is the kind of film that attracts me. It's those rambling narratives with multiple characters that is a little bit plotless, but is somehow ties itself together quite beautifully with some fantastic performance by some fantastic performances, which include actors like Jason London, a very young Ben Affleck, Mila Jovovich, Cole Hauser, Parker Posey, Adam Greenberg, Nicky Cat, Joey Lauren Adams, Rory Cochrane, and in his first film debut, Matthew McConaughey, in a role that sort of, well, defined him to this very, very day. Andy, tell me about your love, hopefully, for Dazed and Confused.
I mean, when this was recommended as one to watch, I commented, I've never seen this film, so this will be a first-time watch for me. And so watching a film that is so beloved to someone else from a few decades ago with fresh new eyes in this day and age, I was worried that maybe it'll feel dated. But one of the joys of this film is that it's set in the 70s. It was released in the 90s, so it was always set in a time period outside the time when it was released. So it doesn't feel dated. It hasn't dated at all. In fact, you've said that it wasn't well received, particularly in the UK back then, because no one could appreciate the American sentimentalities, the last day of high school kind of approach and the kegger parties. But I think in this day and age, a film like this would work a lot better because we have been raised over the past 3 decades on a plethora of films which have focused on this, including the very popular American Pie films. We now know in the UK what American culture at that age is all about. And watching this film, I got it straight away. I got the mix of characters. I got the hazing that was going on, which hazing is a term that 3 decades ago, people in the UK would go, huh? What's that? We don't understand all that thing, but we do now. And I was straight away captured by all the mix of characters telling all their own stories and focuses on their last day. From the college jock who we focus on at the start of it, Randall Floyd, who's kind of the main lead character, who's asked to sign his pledge by his coach to not drink and not take drugs, and he's contemplating whether he actually wants to still play as a star player for the team. And Mitch Kramer, the freshman undergoing the hazing from Affleck's character, who Floyd then takes under his wing. And Mitch Kramer was my in on this film. He was the side character. He was the outsider who wants to fit in, but he's getting jumped by all the cooler kids. And he's getting drawn into this world, and it was easy for me to get drawn along with him. And like you say, the cast, watching this film now and recognizing so many faces pop up, they're like, there's Anthony Rapp, there's Rennie Zellweger, Parker Posey. Everyone in there has gone on to other things and become memorable either on TV or film. And it was so easy to just straight away see them. And McConaughey, in his first role, like you say, he sets the template for everything that he's known for from that point onwards. He's even gotten all right moments in there. All his ticks and his expressions and his approaches to characters are all within his bully of a character within here. But he's not a bully in the nasty, I'm over the top kind of way. He's actually casual about it. And that's what makes him kind of a character you like to hate to like.
I totally agree. I think it's I think it's one of those films, and I'm drawn to this purely independent film that has big intentions. I like films with very little plot, which are dialogue and character driven, very much along the lines of a lot of Richard Linklater's films.
Yeah.
This was his second film after Slacker, and it has a sort of start again. It has a real sort of freewheeling quality to it. I've always been a big fan of Diner by Barry Levinson, which is that sort of freewheeling sort of film based around some central characters. I got it and liked it. I saw it the first time in the States on a gadget known as a laser disc that I was staying with a friend, and he had it, and he said, "You must watch this." And I watched it and loved it. And he said, "That's my life." He said, "That was my last day of school. I'm one of those characters." And funny enough, when they released it in the UK, I watched it with a group of British friends who were a lot more cynical about it, going, "Yeah, it's just kind of uh, filmmaking, Hollywoody type last day of school." And I'm going, "No, my pal told me this is what it was actually like. He completely related to it." So I think you've hit the nail on the head that it maybe now be a lot easier to sort of understand and tie into some of those sort of cultish bits of tribalism that run through it. It's a very easygoing film. The pace runs at its own pace. It's got a fantastic soundtrack, which include
Yeah.
ZZ Top, Alice Cooper, of course, with Schools Out, Kiss, Black Sabbath, everything except Led Zeppelin because they wouldn't give them the rights to Dazed and Confused. But it's just uh, uh, a very easygoing affair. And Matthew McConaughey, as you say, makes such an impact, and his role grew because he was a pal of somebody who got introduced to Richard Linklater, came along, and they saw that they saw the star quality in him. And a bit like American Graffiti, it's one of those sort of socially responsible and totally irresistible movies.
Yep. The mix of characters in it keeps it interesting, and the comedy is light and well placed. There's some stoner moments scattered within there, but I think it just had a charm that just kept me going through it. And like you say, that this kind of a like slice of life kind of filmmaking that Linklater has been known for throughout his career. It's interesting to see how so early on in his career he kind of perfected how he would approach everything going forwards. He would be focused not on an overall plot line, not an overall like we start here, we end there, but just like I'm taking this chunk of these personalities and I'm going to present them. And I love that. I mean, we had similar when we spoke about Nashville all those
Yeah,
all
very
those
much so. The
weeks ago,
Altman-esque feel to it.
where it was just individual stories mixed in and how everyone interacted with each other, and that's what makes this work. And I quite like you, I like this kind of filmmaking. I like this kind of don't tell me something, don't preach to me, don't tell me a full plot line, just give me someone who I can latch onto and see how they interact. Marvelous stuff. I was like I said, I was expecting to be a bit disappointed and to think I don't know why Lee gets this and he raves on about it. But I'm going to be going back and revisiting this because I really enjoyed it. And I think on my next time round, I'll enjoy it even more.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just to sort of add, I mean, talking about sort of the flow of the plot, it's it does feel like a slice of life where the stakes when you're a teenager are really low. You know, how do you get off with a girl that you daren't speak to? Um, how do you get tickets for a gig? You know, most teenage comedies have usually got kid from the wrong side of tracks, girlfriend from the wrong side of tracks, a girlfriend gets pregnant, that kind of thing. Somebody has to die. It's not that. It's just such an easygoing, low key movie that I absolutely adore. I mean, I love that style of movie. It has some genuinely classic moments in it, some great dialogue, some great music, and some moments which are absolutely laugh out loud funny. A beautiful film. If you'd not had the chance to see it, that's Richard Linklater's Dazed and Confused.